Expecting Someone Taller by Tom Holt. Chapter 8.
"Oh, for crying out loud," said Wotan, putting down his fork with a bang. "What do you want now?" "Sorry," panted Logi, breathless and sopping wet. "I didn't realise you were still having breakfast." Wotan smiled wanly. "Raining outside, is it?" "Yes," said Logi, "very heavily." "So what's so important it couldn't wait?" "I think I'm onto something," said Log, sinking into a chair. The dining room of Valhalla, the castle built by Fasolt and Fafnir for the king of the gods, was furnished in Spartan but functional style. It had that air of grim and relentless spotlessness that is described as a woman's touch. The Lord of Tempest looked at him suspiciously. "If this turns out to be another wild goose chase," he said, "I'll turn you into a reservoir and stock you with rainbow trout." Log shuddered. "I'm sure there's something in this," he managed to say. "The ravens have sighted Alberish and—" "Aren't you going to offer your guest a cup of coffee?" Schwertleiter the Valkyrie had come in with a crumb brush and was ostentatiously brushing the table. "I do wish you wouldn't bring work home with you." Wotan turned and glowered at his daughter, who took no notice. "And ask him not to put his briefcase on the table." The Valkyrie swept out, and Wotan turned the full force of his glare on Log. "Now look what you've done," he said. "You've started her off." "But the ravens have seen Alberish and the Rhine's daughters, and they're in this village in England called—" Schwertleiter came back into the room with a bundle of newspapers in her arms. "Ask your friend to sit on these," she said sharply. "I've just had those cupboards cleaned, although why bother I don't know." "Now you see what I have to put up with," whispered Wotan. "What's all this about Alberish and the Rhine daughters?" Log, perched uncomfortably on a pile of back numbers of Die Zeit, started to explain, but before he could get very far, the Valkyrie Grimgerd stalked into the room with a pot of coffee. She had resented making it, and it would just be left to get cold, but she had made it all the same. "I'm doing you some scrambled eggs," she said accusingly to Log. Please, don't bother." "I've started now," said Grimgerd impatiently. Log was about to say thank you, but the Valkyrie had gone back to the kitchen. Almost at once, Schwertleiter reappeared with her arms folded. "There are footmarks all over the kitchen floor," she said icily. "Have you been tracking in and out?" Before Wotan could reply, she too had gone. Wotan's daughters had a habit of asking leading questions and disappearing before anyone could answer them. They had been doing it for over 1,000 years, but it was still profoundly irritating. "In a little village called Coombe," said Log, "which is in Somerset. Now, why else—" "What did you say?" Wotan hadn't been listening. Log took a deep breath, but could get no further. The Valkyrie Waltraud had come in with a plate of scrambled eggs. "As if I didn't have enough to do," she said, slamming the plate down, "and mind the tablecloth." "Sorry," said Log. "I wouldn't eat that if I were you," Wotan muttered when she had gone. "None of my daughters can cook. Although God knows it doesn't stop them. I can cook, but I'm not allowed in the kitchen." Desperately, Log wondered what to do, so as not to offend either the Thunderer or his daughters. He picked some scrambled egg up on his fork, but he did not put it in his mouth. "I've been putting up with this for 11 centuries, continued Wotan. "Much more of it, and I shall go quite mad." "The ravens," said Log for the 4th time, "have found Alberish and the Rhine daughters hanging around in a little village inn. It all started when their mother left me," continued Wotan, "and I was glad to see the back of her. But my dear daughters, all 9 of them, decided that I needed looking after. They didn't want to, of course. They all wanted to have careers and lives of their own. I wanted them to have careers and lives of their own, preferably in another hemisphere." As if to prove his point, the Valkyrie Waltraud came storming in. "You've been eating the bread again, haven't you?" she said bitterly. "That's what it's there for." "You've started a new loaf when there was half a loaf left in the bread bin. Now I suppose I have to throw it out for the ravens." "Half a loaf is better than no bread," Wotan roared after her as she stalked out again. A futile gesture. The father of battles banged his fist on the table, upsetting a coffee cup. A deep brown patch appeared on the tablecloth, and Wotan turned white. "You did that," he said to Loke. "If they ask, you did that. I've got to live in this house." Loke, whose titles include the Father of Lies, was not too keen on this particular falsehood, but the alternative was probably metamorphosis into a disused canal. He nodded meekly. "So, we've all been stuck in this wretched great barn of a place, miles from anywhere, driving each other mad for 1,000 years, said the King of the Gods. "They hate it as much as I do, but they'll never move." "At least there's only 8 of them now," said Loke. "Must have been far worse when Brunhild was—" Loke fell silent, terrified lest his lack of tact should arouse Wotan's anger. But Wotan only laughed. "You must be joking," he said. "Imagine my delight when I'd finally managed to get one of them off my hands. And no question, Brunhild was the worst. And I thought that perhaps they'd all go away, and at last I'd be allowed to wear my comfortable shoes in the dining room. I fixed that miserable child up with Siegfried the Dragon Slayer, the most marvellous man who ever lived. And look what she did to him." Logue nodded sympathetically. Tact was all that stood between him and a future in fish farming. "Mind you," said Wotan, "he was lucky. Imagine what it would have been like being married to her. Give me a spear in the small of the back any day." The Lord of the Ravens shook his head sadly. "They blame me, of course. They blame me for everything. The only people in the world who are entitled to." "About the Rhine daughters," suggested Logue. "Ask them to do anything useful, of course, and you get bad temper all day long. No, my family is a great trial to me, and I'm a great trial to my family. If I had my time over again." "The hoover's broken," said Wildtrold, appearing in the doorway. "I suppose I have to do the stairs with a dustpan and brush." "Yes, I suppose you will." Wotan stood up, his one eye flashing. "You'll enjoy doing that." He strode through the long corridors of Valhalla, with Logue trotting at his heels like a terrified whippet, while all around him there came the calls of the Valkyries, informing him of further domestic disasters, until the vaulted ceiling that the giants had built re-echoed with the sound. "England, did you say?" whispered Wotan. Yes. "Oh, good," said Wotan. "Let's go there straight away." "Mind you," said Wotan, "I don't quite know how we're going to tackle this one." "Couldn't we just rush him?" Logue suggested. "I'll hold his arms while you get the ring off him." They stood and looked up at the electrically operated gates of the hall. A gardener in a smart new boiler suit walked up to them, holding a rake. "You can't park there," he said. The long, sleek Mercedes limousine was blocking the driveway. Wotan stared at the gardener, who took no notice. "Move it, or I'll call the police," said the gardener. "I've told you once." Certainly, right away," muttered Logue. There was no point in causing unnecessary trouble. "Sorry." "That's bad," said Wotan, as they walked up from the village green, where they'd parked the car. "I tried closing up his lungs to make it hard for him to breathe, but it didn't work. We're too near the ring-bearer's seat of power to be able to achieve anything by force. I imagine that idiot. It was under his protection." Wotan stopped and studied the gates. "There's no way through there by violence," he said. "We must be clever." For some reason or other, Logue had a horrible feeling that by we Wotan meant him. "What do you have in mind?" he asked. "There are many things in the world that mortal men fear more than the gods," said Wotan airily. "I think it's about time that the ring-bearer was brought down to earth. He's a human being, not a god, and he's a citizen of a 20th century democracy." Wotan chuckled. "The poor bastard." Malcolm was feeling happier than he had for some considerable time. He'd just had lunch with a remarkably pretty girl. He was going to have lunch with her tomorrow, and best of all, his secretary had just told him that she was going to take her annual holiday in a week's time. She was, needless to say, going to the Cotswolds. Malcolm thought that they would probably make her an honorary member. So when the English Rose came knocking on his door at 4 o'clock, he expected nothing worse than a recital of her holiday plans. He draped a smile over his face and asked her what he could do for her. "There's a man downstairs," she said, "from the government." Given what he had been doing since he acquired the ring, it was understandable that Malcolm misunderstood this statement. He expected to find a humble messenger imploring him to take over the reins of state, or at least to accept a peerage. What he found was a sharp-faced individual in a dark grey suit with a briefcase. "Herr Finger," said the intruder, "I'm from Customs and Excise. We're making inquiries about illicit gold dealing." For a moment, Malcolm forgot who he had become, and his blood froze. Like all respectable people, he knew that he was guilty of something, although what it was he could not say, and the arrival of a representative of the main cop only confirmed his suspicions. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "About a month ago, a considerable sum of money in used currency notes was removed from the vaults of the Bank of England. Similar withdrawals, shall we say, were made from state banks all over the world. At the same time, large quantities of gold made an inexplicable appearance in the same vaults. Have you any comment, Herr Finger?" Malcolm was too frightened to speak, and simply shook his head. On close examination, the gold was found to be part of a consignment supplied by a certain... The man paused, as if choosing the right word. "A certain underground movement," he continued, "to a subversive organisation based in this country but with international links. This organisation has been secretly undermining the fabric of society for some time, Herr Finger." "Has it?" Malcolm's throat was dry. "It almost certainly has, and our investigations have led us to the conclusion." Malcolm, who for the last 25 years had done little in the evenings except watch the television, knew what was coming next. There was no point in running. Faceless men in lounge suits were probably aiming rifles at him this very moment. "That you have some connection with this subversive ring." The word ring exploded in Malcolm's mind like a bomb. He focused on the intruder's mind and did not have to read very far. "Now, did you have any comment to make, Herr Finger, or should I say Malcolm Fisher?" Malcolm leaned back in his chair and smiled serenely. "If only my mother could see me," he said, and the serene smile became a grin, chatting like this with a real god. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Fisher, this is not a laughing matter. You're Logue, aren't you? It's odd. I was frightened of you when I thought you were the taxman, but now you turn out to be a god. I'm not frightened at all." "Oh, well," said Logue. "I should have known better, I suppose, but Wotan thought it was worth a try." "It was," said Malcolm. "You had me worried, like I said. What were you going to do?" "He'll murder me if I go back without it," said Logue. "He's got a horrid temper." "What can he do to you? You're immortal." "That's the trouble." Logue was trembling. "If you're mortal, all they can do is kill you. But if you're going to live forever, they can really get you." "Surely not." "Don't you believe it? He'll turn me into an aquarium. I know he will." "I'll get the housekeeper to bring us some tea," said Malcolm soothingly. Logie calmed down slightly with some tea inside him, but the cup rattled in the saucer as he held it. "I was meant to put the frighteners on you," he said. "First I was to be a customs man, then a VAT inspector, then the fraud squad, then MR5. If that didn't work, then I was to be the man from the IPU." "What's the IPU?" "Inexplicable Phenomena Unit. Wotan was sure you would believe in it. It would be something like those science fiction films about flying saucers invading the Earth. And there's always a government agency that knows all about them, but keeps them a secret so as not to alarm people. They're the ones who come and zap the Martians in the last reel. And I was going to be them, threatening to zap you. Sometimes I think he lives in a world of his own." "He must be a difficult person to work for," said Malcolm. "Difficult?" Logue cast his eyes up to the ceiling. "He's impossible." "But I thought you were the clever one," said Malcolm. "I used to be, back in the old days, when life was much simpler, but progress has left me behind, I'm afraid, and Wotan has got more devious, and he's never forgiven me for the mistake I made in drawing up the contract for Valhalla." "Mistake?" Logue nodded glumly. "Oh, yeah, it was a mistake, all right, and I've never been allowed to forget it. A slip of the pen, and now look at me." What sort of mistake? Asked Malcolm, purely from curiosity. Logie sighed. I might as well tell you. You'll find out sooner or later. The contract with the giants was that they built us the castle in return for trading concessions in Middle-earth, and the German for free port is Freihafen. But the trouble was, Logue said, and even after 1,000 years he blushed, well, my handwriting has never been marvellous, and what I'd written looked more like Freya Zuhaben, which would mean they would have the goddess Freya as their reward for that bloody castle. I don't know what you're laughing at. It was a mistake anyone could have made. Malcolm, despite his ill-concealed mirth, could sympathise, for his own handwriting was none too good. But couldn't you explain the mistake? He said. I did, God knows, but they wouldn't listen, and Wotan had just had a quarrel with Freya, and it was only too glad to get rid of her. He's always quarrelling with his relatives. Again, Malcolm could sympathise. Well, he said, at least it explains how the bargain came to be made. I couldn't understand it the way it is in the books. Now you know. Logue was depressed again. It was only because I suggested this ring business that he didn't change me into something wet and nasty there and then. And that backfired too. Well, you know all about that. And I've been one jump away from metamorphosis ever since. Malcolm felt a curious sense of authority, and his tone to Logue was pleasantly patronising. Don't worry, he said. I won't let him turn you into anything. And how exactly will you stop him? I don't know, Malcolm confessed. But he can't go throwing his weight about like that any more. He'll just have to face facts. He's had his time. Logue raised an eyebrow. Don't take this the wrong way, he said. But for someone who was terrified of the customs inspector a few minutes ago, you're remarkably confident. I know, but that was real life. This is, well, it's real life too, but different somehow. Malcolm was silent for a while, as he tried to work on something out in his mind. You know how some people are good at some things and bad at others, he said. For instance, some people are marvellous at business or the stock exchange or whatever, but they can't change a plug or iron a shirt. Maybe I'm like that. Maybe I'm hopeless at everything except being master of the ring, but I'm very good at that. I know how to do it, more or less, and only I can do it, and I'm happy doing it. Are you? Well, no, but I'm no more miserable doing it than doing anything else. Plus, I can do it well, and I can't do anything else. It's like some people are naturally good singers or snooker players, or they can compose music, and they've never tried it, so they don't know. And then they do try it, just by accident or for fun, never expecting they'll be any good at it, and there they are. I don't know, he said despairingly. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe it's not so easy any fool can do it, but I'm not afraid any more, not of your lot anyway. Logue stared at him in amazement. You've been drinking, he said at last. Malcolm shook his head. No, I mean it. I may be no good at all at real life, but this sort of thing you can tell your boss to do his worst and see if I care. I've already seen off Alberich and the Rhine daughters, and I'll deal with him too, if he makes a nuisance of himself. I mean, what can he do to me? I understand all languages and read people's thoughts, so I'll always know what's really going on. I can change my shape, so anything he tries to attack me with I can either beat or run away from. And I don't think that's all either. I don't think he's got any power against the ring. If he wants to do something and I won't let him, then he can't do it. Stands to reason. How's that? Simple. Unless I do something wrong or think nasty thoughts, nothing unpleasant can happen in the world. So nothing unpleasant can happen to me. Can it? I am just as much of a citizen of the world as anything else, so I am under my own protection. Malcolm was quite carried away by this train of thought. What's that bit in the Bible about he saved others, he couldn't save himself? You won't catch me falling for that one, and that's why I met that girl, he went on more to himself than to Logue. Nice things are happening to everyone else, so they're happening to me too. He laughed with pure joy, and Logue tapped the side of his head. You're as bad as he is, he said. Don't say I didn't warn you. Don't worry about a thing, said Malcolm grandly. Everything will be fine. You'll see. Logue rose to his feet. I hope you're right, he said. If not, come and feed the ducks on me on Sunday afternoons. Wotan leaned back in the driver's seat of the Mercedes, turning over Logue's story in his cavernous mind. He's right, up to a point, said the king of the gods. Like I thought, force and violence are no good. And besides, I'm not sure how far I could take them. I still don't think I could actually take the ring from him against his will without getting into serious trouble.
Who with?
Me, in my role as the god of justice. If I did take it, and I found I wasn't allowed to, I would have to cease to exist. Damn.
The sky god thought hard for a moment, and then smiled. He'd thought of something. Lorg waited impatiently to hear what it was.
It worked before, said Wotan quietly, so why shouldn't it work again?
Lorg was mystified.
What? He asked. The Brunhild option, said Wotan. Why not?
But it didn't work the first time, Lorg said. It failed miserably.
Because of the Hagen factor and the Siegfried aspect. And if we're going to be honest about it, the Brunhild aspect too. But now we're dealing with a different kettle of fish.
The metaphor made Lorg squirm. It's a terrible gamble, he said. Don't blame me if...
As if I would. No, I think I've cracked it. He's just the sort of idiot who'd fall for it.
That's true. Lorg began to feel cautiously optimistic. Why shouldn't he be his own worst enemy, just like everyone else? Malcolm watched the black limousine driving away and poured himself a small whisky. He was rather worried about what he had said. It was the first time he'd ever talked to a god, and perhaps he should have shown more respect. He strolled into the garden, and a blackbird fluttered down and perched in a rosebush beside him. "Have you seen a white moth with pale blue spots on his wings?" asked the bird. "No," replied Malcolm, "but I've got some peanuts if you're hungry." "You can have enough of peanuts," said the bird. "Anyway, I wanted that particular moth. We've got people coming round for dinner tomorrow." "Good hunting, then," said Malcolm. "Try round by the Budleirs." The bird cocked its head on one side. "Thanks," it said. "Good idea. Oh, and by the way..." "Yes?" "Don't underestimate Wotan, whatever you do. There are more ways of killing a cat, you know." "What do you mean?" The bird fluttered his wings. "Don't ask me, I'm only your bird. Besides, it's my favourite proverb." "I hope you find your moth," said Malcolm. "So do I," said the blackbird. "Good night."